Hello, everyone. Welcome to No Man's Podcast, episode number 40. This is the episode Strange Bedfellows, and we are talking about Catwoman number 76 to 77 by John Ostrander and Jim Ballant. And this is our second to last episode, but kind of a side thing, as next one will be the finale, and this doesn't really advance the core plot forward. It's kind of wrapping up a character, which we've had on some of our last few episodes as well. We said goodbye to Nightwing, we said goodbye to Robin, and effectively some of the other characters. And so now here we are with Catwoman. And I will let my guest, Michael, you can see our names at the bottom of the screen. I'll let Michael lead us off with Catwoman number 76.
Okay, Catwoman 76. This issue's called Strange Bedfellows. We last left Catwoman passed out on top of a skyscraper, so we begin this issue. She's asleep and having dreams that briefly recap what she's been through in this story. And she wakes up in bed, naked conveniently, with the Penguin facing her at a desk, and she asks where her clothes are and why she's there. And Penguin's like, "Oh yeah, some of my men found you passed out and brought you here." And he has a proposition for her, which is that he wants to pay her to steal stuff from Luthor that he can use as leverage, because Luthor is trying to take over the city, and he wants to make sure that he gets to keep controlling Gotham's underworld after No Man's Land is over. But Luthor's taking over the city, so he needs to make sure Luthor gives him his cut of the pie. And this is where Catwoman first learns Mercy Graves' name, when he shows her a photo of Luthor with his two bodyguards. Apparently, he also has a chauffeur bodyguard named Hope, so it's Hope and Mercy. And Penguin makes this little joke like, "Oh, one leaves no hope, the other has no mercy." I have no idea if Hope is ever important, or if she's even shown up before, or if it's just been Mercy in what we've been reading, but she doesn't come up again in this story, at least. So Catwoman tracks down those three bumbling goons she's been working with this whole time. Once again, we are reminded that Mookie can get shot repeatedly and not die. Before, they explained this as he has some energy absorbing superpower. In the next issue, we'll learn that there's a little more than that, and we'll get to that when we come to that. Catwoman re-recruits them after saving their lives, and they break into a LexCorp facility, and there's another one of those elaborate voiceover montage things. I know those aren't the right terms, it's comics, but where she's explaining how she's going to sneak in to the building. There's an amusing bit where turns out that the whiskers on her mask are there because they're also lockpicks, and she uses one of them to pick a lock, and that's pretty silly. I like went to the trouble to make removable lockpicks as whiskers. Like, if she was gonna make some cat themed aspect of her costume be a lockpick, why couldn't she have claws? I feel like that would make a little more practical sense as a lockpick. But anyway, moving right along. She steals a bunch of Lexo suits, these robotic Luthor drone suits, wreaks some havoc, and then uses the suits, like controlling multiple at once while she's in one of them. She steals a whole bunch of trucks and giant boxes from Luthor's facilities, which is way more than Penguin thought she'd be able to steal. So yeah, Penguin's able to proposition Luthor, and Luthor tells Mercy to deal with this Catwoman thing, break her, finish her if necessary. And Mercy's all too happy to do this, and that's the end of part 1 of the story. So, yeah, got level of quality as most of the Catwoman we've read, which is not great in my opinion compared to most of what's in these trades. Um, uh, art's well done, but for Catwoman in particular, it's definitely a little overly sexualized. There's at least 2 different points where she's like partially nude for no very good reason. And I like the way he draws the Penguin though, and Luthor. And this is of course balanced second to last issue. He had like the longest run of artists on this title. And we've talked about him before. But so yeah, it was fine. You have anything to say about this one?
Yeah, so as you alluded to, I think the art is fine in the grand scheme of things, but this issue in particular stands out like a sore thumb because Ballant, if you do the math, Selena is like half naked on like literally a quarter of this issue. She wakes up in Penguin's place just wearing a blanket, and she's like that for 5 pages. And then later she's wearing just a towel for a whole page. And some of that even bleeds into other pages. So literally like a quarter of the book almost. And yeah, it is interesting that like when I started this issue, it kind of struck me that because Penguin basically info dumps on her. And it's like, oh yeah, even though we've read a ton of issues of her series, like she's still technically like adjusting to this, not just No Man's Land, but adjusting to being back in Gotham. And because, you know, she's, as what we discussed when we first read Catwoman, she was in New York for a stretch of issues and she ran for mayor and everything. And then, you know, by the time she gets back up here, Batman has her running right back out. And then she's kind of just been running errands in and out of Gotham since she's come back. And so now she's setting up permanent residence potentially. So I looked up Mercy. I'm also having trouble finding the scene where she's actually introduced in this issue. But maybe is she on panel actually? I feel like she is.
Yeah, I mean she's shown up before, but this is when they first name her.
I mean, no,
Penguin chose.
My bad. Not Mercy. I meant to say Hope.
Yeah, she's just in the Penguin holds up.
Okay, and does she look exactly like Mercy? Right? That's what I thought.
She has a different hairdo, and it's kind of a relatively crudely drawn because it's a picture within a picture, but that seems to be the case, I think. They look pretty much the same except for the haircut, but it's kind of hard to tell.
Okay, I found the page again. Never mind. I was totally wrong. But yeah, so apparently she is a character in the comics. I don't think she's in the shows. It doesn't look like it. She was created by Mark Miller in his kind of short, spotty Superman run with Stuart Immonen. I don't remember her at all. I was also questioning whether this was like a single appearance just to make the pun. Yeah, I think it's fun. Yeah, the lockpick whiskers thing is hilarious. And again, I feel like I've said this before on something related to Catwoman, but oh yeah, it was it? I think it was something about her origin. Remember the last issues of Catwoman we read? It was showing like her childhood, and she was in the circus, right?
Yeah.
And so like this lockpick thing, like I don't know, like is this a new revelation just for this issue, or has that been previously established? I haven't read enough of this series, especially early on, to know if that is a reveal. Like that's kind of a big deal to do in this like very minor instance in the end of this era of the series. And then I think it's funny how when she gets to the battle suits part, like she's basically surrounded by all these dudes in these high-tech armored weaponry, but she has a shock collar on them. And so essentially, just from the threat of the shock collar, she has like a dozen of these hostages who are currently wearing like mechanized weapon, like highly weaponized suits, and they just follow her because she can, shock them and stuff. It's a funny gag, like that, the idea of being subdued, but you're like you have all this weaponry and protection at the same time. And also, as I'm reading this, and this will be a little bit more relevant as we move to the second issue, there's a little bit of continuity questions because if you recall, I don't know if it was directly last episode, but the last time we saw the Penguin, he confronted Luther and tried to basically present a similar kind of deal. And Luther's like, and Penguin thinks he has the leverage because he kind of makes a threat. And Luther's like, Mercy, beat the shit out of him. And they take down all of Penguin's goons. She takes down all of Penguin's goons and then subdues him. Does that take place before this arc, after this arc? I'm not really sure. That goes to the whole continuity. And I would not remotely look to the order in the trade as reference, as we've discussed on previous episodes. I don't know where that can fit in. I imagine maybe that arc has to take place after this. Like Penguin loses, gets screwed over by Catwoman, but as a last-ditch attempt tries to still go to Luther, and then that's when he definitely doesn't have leverage, because it doesn't really make sense before this. I mean, I guess it could, but if Penguin was so humiliated in that way, you wouldn't think that he would so quickly think of another plan to try and get with Luther. Also, I could just be totally stupid and non-observant, but these issues are the first time I'm really, really noticing that they're coloring Selina's lipstick purple. I'm pretty sure they've done that the entire time, but it's never stood out to me. All right, let's move into 77. We open with some economics lessons, which are always fun. And then Mookie blows up all the mechs because if you recall, you mentioned how she got her goons back, right, in the last issue?
Yeah.
So Mookie is the one who's like potentially mentally challenged, potentially has like a cross-dressing kink, and also is invulnerable to explosives and bullets and everything. So she puts him in one of the suits and has all the other suits on autopilot, and he just blows up the whole thing, blows up Luther's compound. And then Penguin betrays Catwoman, but she gets out of the bind by essentially drawing faster than him. And she blows up his base too. And again, that's like, all right, Penguin's totally fucked here. And he's totally fucked in the other time that he confronts Luther, so I don't know which one comes first. And then this is the weird part of this issue, and ultimately this entire run by John Ostrander, maybe even going back to before that, is that we do get a Batman appearance in these issues. Catwoman's like, let me go meet with Batman because she needs Deadman for something, and Batman is going to reach Deadman through Zariel. And Zariel is like this dumb angel character who appears in Grant Morrison's JLA. And he was initially Grant Morrison. It's actually funny. I've never thought of this. There's a parallel. So Grant Morrison in his JLA run, which starts in like 1996 or 7, he says, I want to use Hawkman because his whole thing is, after the Bwahaha era and then the kind of recesses of the 90s, let's restore the classic Big Seven, Justice League, and all the crucial characters, and they're going to be godlike, and they're going to do extinction level threats and stuff like that. Obviously, there are some things that he rolls with the status quo. So he has Wally West and he has Kyle Rayner, but he wants Hawkman, and DC's like, Hawkman is a total mess because we shot ourselves in the foot like 20 times since Crisis, and completely ruined that character in multiple stages. So he is toxic, and we're not going to allow anyone to use Hawkman. Like, Hawkman literally doesn't appear in comics from like, I don't know, probably like 95 through like 2002 when Jeff Johns finally resurrects him. And so Grant Morrison's like, all right, I'll make a sort of equivalent character and put my spin on it. And that's where Zariel comes in. And he's just like a dumb angel character, and he's pretty minor. And really doesn't get brought up much at all after kind of the Morrison era. And then the parallel, and this is not relevant to No Man's Land, is Morrison basically goes through the exact same thing when he moves over to the X-Men like 5 years later or whatever, because he wants to use Colossus. But a couple years earlier, Colossus had sacrificed his life as the finale to the almost like decade, like 8-year long running legacy virus plotline, because his sister, Ileana Rasputin Magic, dies from the legacy virus. She's one of the first major deaths within actual named characters. And then in the very end, there's a cure developed, but somehow, I don't remember the specifics, but like to fully test and prove that the cure works, someone has to sacrifice their life using it. I don't remember, but that's what happens to Colossus. And so Grant Morrison's like, I want to use Colossus. He's cool. And Marvel's like, no, he's dead. We have to respect continuity, which I respect. And so he's like, all right, literally because he could, this is not the only reason, but because he couldn't use Colossus, he creates the entire concept of secondary mutations and gives Emma Frost her ability to turn into Diamond. And so she essentially fills Colossus's role as the heavy, kind of invulnerable character. And then the next flagship run, Astonishing X-Men by Joss Whedon, because Joss Whedon is a big fucking deal, he can bring back Colossus with almost no explanation, and it doesn't connect and make sense. And Jeff Johns brings back Hawkman, and I would say maybe because he was a bigger deal at that point, I'm not sure. But also, even though arguably it made Hawkman even more confusing and a mess, Jeff Johns did go through a lot of trouble of explaining the return. So all that out of the way, Zariel is referenced here in a single bit of dialogue, and we don't even see him. And Catwoman, it's unspecified how much time passes, but it seems to be days, maybe even weeks of Catwoman basically just playing Robin Hoods and trolling the Lex Luthor sites some more. She's destroying their resources, stealing them and giving them to actual Gothamites, stuff like that. And then she decides, and by this point, Luthor is like, Mercy, go kill Catwoman. Just do it. And Mercy, we don't see her really trying much. If this was stretched out longer, we might. But Mercy is not successful in that. She's always one step behind Catwoman. And Catwoman finally arranges a meeting with Lex. And there's like a promise, like, you can't fuck me over. And so they show up to the meeting, and Catwoman's like, all you need to do is ask me to stop. And he's like, I want you to stop. And she's like, you have to say please. And he says please, and then she stops. And that's the end of Catwoman's entire arc in No Man's Land. And the kind of epilogue, the happy ending, is that she gets passports and a ton of cash for her goons. So they get their happy ending, and they're going to go to the Cayman Islands or whatever. And then the really weird twist is that Mookie, this character who we all assumed, had like latent metahuman powers that were unlocked, and that's like basically what we were already explained as earlier. It turns out he's actually dead and is in some kind of limbo after he was a goon of the Joker's and died in an explosion. So he's just been not willing himself to die somehow and has been walking around. And that explains why nothing affects him. And so Deadman shows up and is just like, hey, buddy, let me take you to heaven. And then it ends. And it's so strange. I don't know why we needed that at all. He could have just been a minor metahuman and gone to the islands with them, or just not even been referenced. And it's so weird. And then we have a final splash page of Catwoman swinging through the Gotham City skyline. So, do you have some thoughts on this, and then we'll kind of wrap up the arc, and we'll wrap up this series as a whole.
My only real substantial thought of most of this issue is pretty much similar quality to the last, except a little more, I don't know, convoluted or weird. My main thought is that Mookie twist has to be one of the dumbest, randomness, most needlessly convoluted plot twists I've ever read in anything. Like, I just don't know why that was a thing. Like, what? So he was a ghost, but they said he was like keeping mass from the explosions to look like he was alive. That doesn't make any. What? He was dead the whole time. Okay, what?
Yeah, all right, it's a limbo thing, and it's a entirely pointless, gratuitous dead man guest appearance. Which also, by the way, I've been a defender of Jim Ballant this entire time. His dead man, not remotely nice looking. There's nothing unique about it, and it's actually like one of the worst dead man I've seen. And granted, there's not a ton of dead man appearances, so usually when someone's drawing dead man, they care about dead man or have an interesting take. But this is up there, one of the worst. But the worst part was what you were saying, explaining how he absorbs the mass from explosions to keep his corporeal constitution going. And also, there's like the entire time. Also, Mookie's been presented as like a little bit mentally off, and that doesn't seem to have any connection to his corporeal status. And in the end, he has it's granted it's only one line, so it doesn't necessarily have to be out of his ordinary, out of his established characterization, but it definitely seems like a moment where he's like confronted with the truth, and he like is totally mentally there and normal for a second. It's very strange. It's so odd. But that's that. Do you have anything further?
Not much more. This is fine. Catwoman was probably one of the lowest tier books we read pretty consistently in terms of quality, but I mean, I don't know. The art was consistently decent, but definitely not as good as Robin or Nightwing or the better Batman ones.
Yeah, it's not great. I think it's gotten worse with each issue. In fact, as it ties closer, it's always been tied to No Man's Land, but I'll just say as it goes on, I think it's gotten worse. I actually did quite enjoy the first like 2 or 4 issues that we read, which I may have to do with the fact that they were written by Devin Grayson, not Ostrander, not sure. But that concludes this arc and our time with Catwoman. Now some quick notes on Catwoman, and some of this I've already said, but some of this is new. So Catwoman is officially done with No Man's Land, obviously because we only have one more episode, but so is the creative team. John Ostrander was only here on Catwoman for 6 issues, and we read all of those issues. He's still writing Martian Manhunter around this time, which is a really well-received, good run. But then by the time Martian Manhunter winds down, and starting pretty much around this point, with few exceptions, he basically becomes exclusively a writer of Star Wars comics for literally the next 14 years. And at the end of those 14 years, he pretty much retires. And as far as I could tell, he should have been around 65 when he stopped consistently writing comics. So I don't know, but he was a freelancer the entire time, so it's not like he has a pension or 401k. I have no idea, what his financial situation is like. I hope him the best. And also his retirement kind of lines up with the Star Wars license reverting from Dark Horse to Marvel. So I hope all the best to Ostrander. I can't say his Catwoman stuff was amazing, though. And Bronwyn Carlton takes over writing Catwoman for a while. She's not the last writer on the series. There's at least one, maybe two more runs, and I discussed that in a little bit more detail in a previous Catwoman episode. Go check that out. While Staz Johnson, for the art, moves over here from Robin. And in our last Robin episode, I discussed who was coming into Robin, I believe. But the real big deal here is Jim Balent leaving, who has been with this title literally from the very beginning, with just a few fill-ins. And this was also, back in the very beginning, was his first breakout gig. So, and he didn't do, it's like he did some things in between and some things overlapped and a few things right before. But basically, Jim Balent's career to this point is these 77 plus or minus issues of Catwoman. And the very next month, he releases Tarot, Witch of the Black Rose, #1, from his independent Broadsword Comics, which is basically, it's a lot in common with the Catwoman and a lot in common with his strengths. It's a bad girl comic book, but it's got like Wicca elements. And apparently he's actually like serious about that. Like it could be all for show, but like he claims authenticity in his representation of Wicca in his softcore bad girl comic book. And Tarot is still running and up to issue 122. That will be the issue coming out in May. And he's basically never gone back to mainstream work outside of covers, pinups, and maybe like anniversary stories and stuff like that. He will have some contribution in the upcoming Catwoman 80th anniversary special, which is, I think, definitely nice to see and definitely warranted and a requirement, I would say, because I would say, I mean, at the very minimum on volume, Jim Balent is the definitive, I'd say the definitive Catwoman creator of all time. And I'd put maybe Darwin Cook right below him just for how amazing Darwin is, and also obviously for the design credits for the redone costume. But ultimately, Darwin didn't draw hardly any Catwoman. So that's that. Catwoman is done. Jim Balent is done. Go read Tarot, Witch of the Black Rose. And that's this episode. Next episode is the finale. It'll be the final arc of No Man's Land. Joker is going to be involved. Gordon is going to have some stuff happen. And it'll set the path for the new status quo. I'm sure Luthor will still be up to stuff. So that's that. Thanks for watching this episode. Tune in next time. Catch up on the previous 39 plus a bonus episode. And have a good night.